Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Melanie Davis. I am the Unitarian Universalist Association's Our Whole Lives Program Manager. My usual co-host, Reverend Amy Johnson at the UCC, is wonderfully on vacation right now, and so we are proceeding without her. I know she's joining us in spirit. Today, we're going to be talking about parent and guardian orientations for our whole lives and sexuality and our faith. And I'm so pleased to have two repeat guests with us, Kat Good and Jenn Ringgold. Kat, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kat Good. I'm the Assistant Director of Religious Education at the Community Church of Chapel Hill Unitarian Universalist in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I coordinate OWL there.
I'm Jenn Ringgold, and I am the Communications Director for the Michigan Conference United Church of Christ, as well as the Program Associate for Youth Ministry. I spent 10 years in a local UCC church as the Director of Educational Ministries, and started and ran an OWL program for over a decade. I am no longer on staff at the local church, but I am still contracted with them to maintain OWL programming because they've kept that as a priority. And I'm super excited to be here to share some tips and tricks with all of you today.
Great. I see that lots of people are introducing themselves in the chat, which is fabulous. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. It's much easier for us to find them. I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A, and if there are questions that need to be asked in the moment, I will share those with Kat and Jenn. Otherwise, we'll hold them for the end and get to those questions later on. I was reminded earlier that I wanted to make a brief announcement, which is that for those of you kicking off grade 7 to 9 programs, we do have a 2023 version of the recommended updates. You can email owl@ucc.org or owl@uua.org. I'd like to start us off with a reading, because I know that especially for UU religious educators, this has been a hard summer, followed by a hard spring with lots of folks being transitioned out of their jobs. And so I want to just take a moment for us to breathe together before we jump into another busy year. So this is a poem called Conspiracy from Incantations for Rest, Poems, Meditations, and Other Magic by Etna Danner. What if we tried to breathe together? Pull in, pull deep, release together. What would be born from a unified fulfillment of the bodily self and its undeniable need? What if we all try to breathe together? A shared breath is a moment, refreshment, and a reminder of our more than oneness. And if we continue, if we slow and quicken a pace with each other, a murmuration of lungs becomes one organ singing. And if we continue, learn each other's rhythms over time, rising and falling like waves, we become a perfect thing. A conspiracy dancing a dance of need and met need, request and offering, feeding each other. What if we decided to breathe together? What if we open the airways? What if we unblock, unbind, unfetter the hand that feeds us? The earth, the air, and the water that hold us and shape us were breathing together before we found ourselves existing. And so they will continue after we're gone. Imagine our final goodbye coming later than sooner. Imagine our final breaths in paradise. It's not too late to slow down, fall into the dance, catch the vibrating air, and release our lungs into song. Anything breathing cannot help but breathe, but breathing together is a choice that we make. Blessed be. And so we will begin our program with Kat. sharing some slides and offering some information, followed by Jenn, who will have lots of resources and conversations to have. So Kat, take it away.
Great. Well, it is nice to breathe together and to be together today. I'm going to screen share while we are talking. So we're going to talk today about OWL orientations, and two things to note as we begin this is I'm coming at this from the orientation session, not the information session. So there's a different strategy if you're working with people who are new to OWL. And if that is interesting to you, we can talk about that at the end. But I'm assuming that this is for either families that are somewhat acquainted with OWL, and this is to like really bring them into what is happening, or you have an established OWL culture, and this is how you maintain it. The other thing I want to note is the orientations are written, and you can and should do them as they are written. All of these tips are just to enhance your program and to make it run smoother. They're not actually suggestions to any kind of curriculum change, because trusting the curriculum is the like first, best, and easiest tip for running OWL. And since this is a session in each curriculum level, you should follow that. With that said, I'm going to focus on tips in 3 different areas. So admin, empowerment, and trust. So we're going to start with admin. So we've all been to a meeting that could have been an email, but the OWL orientation is actually not a meeting that can be an email. People need information in different ways. So anything that you can email ahead of time, you should do that. But not everybody is going to glean that information from an email. So the orientation is a good opportunity to reinforce anything that you have already sent with hard copies and verbally. Write it in the sky if you have to, but make sure that you're using the meeting as a valuable time to give information in a different way. There's also parts of the orientation which cannot be an email. And we're going to talk about those when we get to empowerment and trust. There's a lot of relationship building that happens in the orientation. But I wanted to start with the reminder that actually the orientations cannot just be an email. My slide, there we go. Next up is to bring your OWL books. This is one of my favorite tips. After my first year of coordinating and having kids who got halfway through 5th grade without the book or with an old edition, I finally just bought a bunch of them and I bring them to the orientation, and I sell them back to families that need them. You're welcome to provide them. However you structure your programs monetarily is your business, but having the books on hand that you're going to require for the course is really important. And my pro tip is if you buy them from InSpirit during GA, there's usually free shipping. It's worked for the last 3 years. So no promises for next year, but that is a good way to stock up on these resources. Is this not forwarding? There we go. The next tip is also about books. The new K1 curriculum is fantastic. It has amazing books in it, and inevitably your families are going to want to borrow them. And you should encourage that, but don't loan out the OWL copy. because you will not get it back, and you never know when you're going to need to refer to something that you've already discussed. And you actually can't do that with 6-year-olds if you don't have the physical copy of the book. So I bought doubles of all of the books and even triples of some that I know that families are really in demand. And then we have a lending library. And one of the things that we go over at the orientation is how to use the lending library. It's pretty casual, but getting doubles of the books really makes your program more vibrant and easier for people to use and do the at-home component.
Kat, if I could interject that for congregations that have a tight budget, building your OWL library or sexuality library in general can be a good way for people to be of service to the congregation by making a donation specifically to the OWL program as opposed to the general fund.
That's a great tip. So now we're going to shift from admin into the next goal that I have for orientations, which is to empower the parents and caregivers that are at the orientation. We all know that parents and caregivers are the primary sexuality educators, but sometimes they don't know it. And so the orientation is the reminder that they need, that they're not just handing you their children for the next 10, 12, 26 weeks, that really this work is happening at home and it's already been happening. And the orientation is a lovely time to help them feel more comfortable with their really important role as the primary sexuality educator. And what that can look like in an orientation is like, you might wonder what feels like off track, but if it is in service of caregivers feeling more capable, do that. So for some groups, that means that we spend a lot of time workshopping sample question box questions. I had another group that was full of, I called them my varsity team, full of facilitators themselves whose children were going through OWL, and we made stickers of hope for the question box, and then we collaged the question box for the kids to have kind of like a message from their loved ones as they asked questions. And so it can look different with different groups, but really empowering those primary sexuality educators and thinking of them as like embedded facilitators, right? You get their children for just a couple hours and also like a small slice of their sexuality education journey, but parents get them and caregivers get them for that entire time. So this is a really important part of the orientation.
I'm glad that you mentioned your varsity team, because parents whose children have already gone through OWL can be on that varsity team as well. And sometimes I get questions like, well, if the parents have already sent kids through, do they really need to go to the orientation? And that's up to each individual congregation. I always prefer for the parents to keep coming back because their children are older, they're seeing something in a different way, they're experiencing OWL differently. We have perhaps a new edition of our whole lives that we want to orient the parents to. And they can also say, hey, this is how I helped my kid at home support the facilitation that was going on. So the parents are also your varsity team.
Yeah, and we've had really good luck with parents and caregivers who go through OWL and then want to become facilitators. And like that's a positive OWL experience can be a really great recruitment tool as well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about like opting out and because we also don't really allow opting out, but how you can enforce that. So the second empower tip is comes from the orientation for K1. It's my favorite part of the orientations. There's a little story about going to a musical and coming out and being able to hum the melody, but not necessarily knowing the lyrics. And I remind myself of that every time I'm getting ready to do an orientation, and I use it as the same goal for the orientation. Like, the orientation does not need to be perfect. Anything that you forget, you can email again. What it needs to be is a transfer of that happy melody. People need to come out of it feeling like this is good, they can do it. We might not have gotten all the words right, but we can hum the melody. And so I've borrowed that little lesson, which is really for parents and caregivers, but I use it for myself as I do these orientations. And then finally, for empowering, a really important part of the orientation is just reminding everybody that what's happening is perfectly normal, that kids are going to have a lot of reactions, a lot of different reactions to OWL, and so are caregivers. And whatever you're feeling towards OWL is okay. That being said, I like to remind parents and caregivers that they know their child best. They know like what is actually out of range, and a little resistance is expected. And also, no one should ever be forced to do OWL. It's not good for them and it's not good for the group. So we want to like reinforce that what's happening is normal, but also not push people beyond what is normal for them. All right, we're going to move into trust tips. This is one of the tips that I have developed over time, which is that I noticed as I was doing these orientations that the caregivers really were mirroring the stage of their child. And so what that looks like is that K1 takes a lot of energy to organize and orient. But they're really enthusiastic. They're really like there for it, and they're going to read everything you send them, and it's amazing. Fifth grade families, in my experience, have a ton of questions, just like the fifth graders themselves. And so you're going to want to build in time for answering those questions. Eighth grade families get a little bit jaded and are squirrely, just like the eighth graders. So I am currently organizing an eighth grade orientation for Saturday and a fifth grade orientation for Friday. And all morning I have received emails from eighth grade families saying, I don't really think I need to do this, which I expect because eighth graders resist as well. But by the time you get to high school, they're really driving themselves. They're choosing to be there, and parents are supporting them. And so that is lovely too. But I think of high schoolers as in the driver's seat and their caregivers in the passenger seat. And that helps me kind of calibrate the orientations to them. This is a tip that I like to start with, to invite partnership and model boundaried support from the beginning. I saw some advice in one of my professional groups that said you should start the way you want to continue. And I think that's really true for the orientations as well. So before the orientation, I always send out a Google registration form, which is getting, like contact information and the actual admin pieces I need. But I end with this question: is there anything we should know about your child to ensure their success in OWL? Special needs, trauma, triggers, identity, or family changes? And the reason why I ask this question in a Google form is that people are more boundaried in writing. So there's an editing process that goes through writing something down rather than spilling it out in person. And so I still say, would you like a facilitator to contact you about this? And I've done that I've already done that this year, but mostly people can get what they need said in that form. And then we're modeling boundaries around sharing information and also how this is going to work. All right, this is if there's one tip that I want you to take away from me, this is it. Bring staff in to lead the orientations. This has so many benefits. And so I'm going to talk I'm going to kind of talk through all of them. It's very important to support your facilitators, and one of the ways you can do that is by buffering them. It is incredibly hard for facilitators to hold all of the rules. So I don't want my facilitators to have to deal with the 8th grade parents who are trying to wiggle out of the orientation. It is much easier for me as the staff person to say, I'm sorry, those are the rules, than it is for a facilitator who I'm hoping is dedicating their energy to preparing like excellent sessions for the participants. So the way that we do it at the community church is the lead facilitator for the level is at the orientation, but they're not leading the orientation. So I don't facilitate 1st or 5th grade. So I lead those orientations with the OWL facilitators. I'm the lead facilitator for 8th grade, so the DRE does that orientation session. And I'm there to meet parents, but I'm not running that orientation. And what that does is it spreads around some of the labor, right? Because parents come and caregivers come with their own stuff, and this lets a paid staff person field those concerns and kind of protects volunteers and the limited resource of volunteers. It helps with the boundaries. It also signals that OWL is like an important thing. It is not just like a sex ed class that's happening in the church basement, right? That this is like our main event. And bringing in staff, whether that's the minister or your religious educator, like if you can have a staff person there, it is going to legitimize your program in a really important way. It also signals to families that you are watching what's happening, that this is not a rogue thing. And that is important as well. And then finally, having a 3rd person that is involved, a staff person preferably, but a coordinator, someone who is not the lead facilitator or on the facilitation team, provides accountability. It's very hard to go to the facilitator and say, my kid is having a problem. And I have found that when we added that kind of buffer person, we got much more helpful feedback when we would do evaluations, because people would actually tell us what the issues were, because they didn't feel like they were going to hurt the facilitator's feelings by giving them real feedback. And so having this staff person lead orientations has really changed our program. And this is the tip that I am like most invested in. And then finally, my last tip is just a tricky one. It's where I always get tripped up. So we've all heard it takes a village, and they are all going to turn up for the orientation, which is lovely that kids have so many people in their corners, but make more copies than you need. Don't be like me 3 minutes before the orientation every single time in the copy room, because I forgot that having 10 participants means that we're probably going to get between 18 and 25 people at the orientation. We have everyone from grandparents to step parents to sometimes we've had 4 parents there. Like I love the way that people turn out to support their kids at the orientations. And someday I'm going to be fully prepared with all the copies I need for it.
Thank you, Kat. To your point about inviting staff to participate, I think a benefit of having your minister there in addition, not in place of, but in addition to the religious educator, is that it really emphasizes the fact that this is faith formation and spiritual growth. That even though that's also the task of the religious educator, sometimes people think, well, the educator does the educator stuff and the minister does the theology stuff. So having both representatives there can be really helpful. And again, it spreads the work and it makes it a congregational effort as opposed to, like you said, in the basement, just, the old program. I think those are all wonderful suggestions. I know that there's going to be a question asked about all those parents who are attending. And what I always suggest, and I know Amy does this as well, is that anyone who has custodial authority over that child should be at the orientation and sign the permission slip. What we don't want the facilitators or staff getting involved in are custody issues, and one parent doesn't want a kid in OWL and the other parent does. That is not our job. That's the family's job. If they need to, they can involve their lawyer. Our job is just to say, whoever has custody, we want you at the orientation, we welcome you. And yeah, if you want to bring the grandparents, that's fine. But ultimately, the grandparents aren't making the decision. It's the parents or the guardians.
That's a really good point. And two things that jogged for me is we had a bunch of grandparents bring kids last year, and so we also invited the grandparents, since they were going to be the one actually physically bringing the kid to OWL, so that we could all be in the same information page. And the copy thing was like a little bit silly, but actually there is a deeper purpose for that. And as a divorced kid myself, it really puts people in uncomfortable situations to have to share. And you're going into this delicate situation where you're asking full families to be there in whatever configuration that they have. And so really accommodating them and having seating that isn't all on one couch, right? That you're having individual chairs and that you have enough copies so that people can be comfortable in that space that is vulnerable.
Thank you. That is a wonderful build. Thank you so much. Now, Jenn, would you like to share your wonderful information as well?
Absolutely. I'm so excited to build off of all of the amazing things that that Kat just shared. It's really fun. We did another taking flight together, and it's just really cool to be able to share our tips and tricks together with all of you. So I'm going to share my screen, start my slideshow. And hopefully you can see everything all right. So what I have done is kind of pull some different resources and things together. As Kat mentioned, the parent orientation there is a lesson plan for it within the curriculum. So it really does walk you through all of the things that are important. And I'm going to kind of highlight some of the things that I feel have had some of the greater impact and conversation starters with people during that adult orientation for OWL. So one of the things that I always really like to take time to highlight and have conversations about are the program assumptions within OWL. This is specifically related to the upper levels, so 7th through 12th grade. But I also think that it's important to have these conversations with the adults of younger children as well, knowing what OWL assumes. Something like the last one, where we specifically state that it is healthier for young teens to postpone sexual intercourse, right? Those sorts of things really help make sure that we're all on the same page with parents and caregivers in what the messaging is that is coming from OWL. Even those first ones, the reminder that everyone is sexual. This is not about the actual behaviors of sex, but it's how we're human. And so talking about all of those things and bringing those up right from the beginning is a really important piece of what I have found in talking with adults about preparing them for their children to go through OWL. Another couple of things that are really sometimes difficult conversations to have, but really important, are helping adults remember where their sexuality education came from. And so building off the idea of why it is that they're showing up there, whether it's they were really, really lucky and had a great education and want to help make their kids' education even better, or whether they're coming from a place of, I had nothing and I don't know how to do this. And so just understanding that your parents are all going to be parents and caregivers coming from different levels of what their expectations are, what they want their kids to hear, and kind of meeting in the middle ground. One of the other big tenets that comes out of the orientation of getting ready to have young people in OWL is the idea that this has been happening their whole lives, regardless of when they're starting OWL as a young person. They've been getting messages, whether it's from their parents as those primary sexuality educators, whether it's from social media, shows that they watch on TV. And so how are we working together in that village of all of those adults and facilitators to make sure that our kids are getting the message that we want them to hear? One of the things that I believe this was in my very first OWL training, that when I was trained at my first levels, that one of the facilitators read. This is an excerpt from a speech by Elizabeth Canfield, and it compares, the slides will go out, so I'm not going to read it to you word for word, but it compares the idea of swimming and how we make sure that we don't want our kids to drown in a pool. So we make sure that they get swimming lessons that are age appropriate, they build up on their knowledge, and so that they can be successful, to what that looks like if we were to teach if we don't teach sexuality education like that. So basically that's the gist of the swimming story. And I found that parents just kind of sit for a minute after you finish reading this and are like, oh, that's why we have to have these uncomfortable conversations.
Jenn, I have a sermon that I've delivered for a couple years for free to congregations, and anybody who wants to get a copy of this sermon and deliver it yourself, just email me at owl@uua.org. But I started with that reading. It's I think UCC folks could also use the sermon. They would just have to flip it over, revise it. But it talks about our denominational history of support for reproductive justice and marriage equity and whatnot, but then it goes into our whole lives. So one of the ways, when we were talking, when Kat was talking about bringing in the staff, another way that you can support your program with staff is by speaking from the pulpit about sexuality in our whole lives, to set the stage for your program. And so that resource is available if anybody wants a free sermon. Sorry to interrupt.
No, don't apologize at all. That's fantastic to know that that's available and you're willing to share, because this is extremely powerful, one for parents and caregivers and in orientation, but from a congregational standpoint as well. I think to validate why we do this work and why we do it in a place of faith. So awesome. Which kind of leads into the next one. The faith piece of the conversation. So I'm coming from a UCC setting, and I work in collaboration with our local UUA, the fellowship within my town as well. So we kind of pool together resources and students and advertise within the community together. And so one of the things that one of the questions that I get a lot is, well, why do we have to have the faith perspective? Or why do we have to do this in a church? Or my family doesn't believe in the Christian pieces of the sexuality in our faith. So how are you going to navigate that with my students in the classes that are in your church building? And so this is actually the slide that I have shared at the last couple of orientations that I have done in regards to, and I love the sexuality and our faith pieces from the UUA. So we kind of pull a mix of both, and then also making sure that we're saying straight up front that we value where everyone is. We have community members that participate in our OWL classes that aren't from either one of our congregations. And so just letting them know up front where we're at, why we do the things that we do, that we're going to be offering times for reflection, meditation, breathing exercises, and about how all of this pulls us together as a community. And that there's space for all different beliefs in that setting as well. One of the other things that I find really important in making sure that comes across in the parent conversations that I have leading up to OWL is that OWL is, and we were actually talking about this at the very beginning as we were joining and doing mic checks, comprehensive sexuality that's age appropriate is abuse prevention. And making sure that families understand that this is a way that that their families can add a layer of safety to the conversations that they're having, and recognizing that children need to have this information that's age appropriate in order to know and have bodily autonomy and to protect themselves and be less vulnerable.
And Jenn, if I could put in a plug here for the new edition of K1 OWL. It came out in January. So if anybody's still using the first edition, please recycle that and purchase the new edition. It has a new way of approaching. The old edition had a no go tell, like you're supposed to tell the person no. Well, 5-year-old doesn't have the agency or confidence to say no, right? So the new way of approaching it is to make sure that, children know they have trusted adults, but also it's the adults and the people around them who are responsible for that child's safety. So please, please use the newest edition of K1.
I think this is something that parents don't always and caregivers don't always want to talk about either. And having that conversation helps, right? To allow them to understand that that responsibility lies on them as well as the adults in their children's lives. This one I just put big. As much as possible, even in addition to the parent orientation session, creating time to talk and listen, which should be in here. I'll edit that before we send it out. Talk with and listen to parents and caregivers. I loved Kat's slide about how the way the adults are is kind of similar to where the children are in their level of what they need from the director of an OWL program or the facilitators, and giving them the space to be able to work through the feelings, the language, the confidence building, and the empowerment piece of what they need is really, really important. If you again, that empowering piece, Kat did a really great job with this, but understanding that OWL allows parents to have this like really great network underneath them in this work that they're doing with their own children. So there is an awesome resource. This is where I'm going to give some plugs for resources. Parents and caregivers as sexuality educators, right? So if you have the time and the space, this resource is available for free. There's a link there to get it for UUA and the UCC version. This is like the setup for the classes, if you can, to really give parents, I believe it's 12, am I right?
It's 12 workshops, but they don't all have to be used. So people could vote on, maybe they don't want the unplanned pregnancy one, or maybe they don't want the consensual non-monogamy one, or whatever. They can choose which ones they want to do. And it can be online or in person.
And it's a great extension of giving you as OWL facilitators kind of, again, the lesson plan, right, laid out for you, but to give that space and that time for parents to process some of the different topics that they're going to need in raising their children and being empowered as sexuality educators. I have used 3 lessons from this program and done like a 3-part series online and open to the community as well, so that you just get parents talking, which is a really great way if you're building an OWL program or if you're just starting and trying to figure it all out. If you can start and build that group of parents and caregivers to feel empowered and say, we want this for our children, again, that's just another boost in building your program.
And Jenn, if I could add that in some congregations, I don't know if this is true in UCC churches, but I know that some Unitarian congregations do this. They will run, the parents will attend OWL while their young people do. And the only thing I would say about that is this is better than having the parents take 7 to 9 OWL. I like the idea, or run adult OWL if you want. But I think it's really special, especially if we're talking about the 4 through 6 or the 7 to 9 program, for those youth to experience that on their own, share what they want to share with their parents, but have that experience to themselves. And the parents can have their own experience taking this course or taking adult OWL, so that everybody's learning, but they're not experiencing the same activities and whatnot. So it keeps it special, I think, for the younger participants.
I love that. This is another great resource for empowering parents, especially, I should have had a picture here, but this came out through the pandemic, and it's such a gorgeous thing. I try to promote it every time I can. The Under Your Wing videos for parents of young children. I think this works great across the board. I could do sermons about these, to be honest with you, since Melanie mentioned that with the swimming story. I think any adult can learn from watching these videos about what is age appropriate and developmentally appropriate in short little bits, to be able to have the language and lists of resources at the end of the videos to help empower parents, caregivers, and community members. I think teachers, anyone can watch these videos and learn from them.
Yeah, they're designed for parents and caregivers of children in grades K through 1, but there could be overdraft, that's not the right word, but it would work for children in 1st grade and 2nd grade as well. There are 8 workshops on how babies are conceived and how they join families and disabilities and gender identity, just some basic topics. And yeah, absolutely, especially in this time when there's a lot of conversation in the media about, well, they shouldn't be teaching kindergartners that. And this is exactly how to have those developmentally appropriate congregations, and it can give parents and religious personnel the language about why it is important and why it is absolutely appropriate to have these conversations.
Yeah, 100%. They're so well done. And then again, the parent guide for 4th through 6th grade. So like Melanie was saying, the idea of like parents having information alongside of what their kids are learning, but not the same way, I think is really important. And this, I think, is parents don't necessarily want a book, right? They necessarily want to go to class at the same time as their kids are, but the parents who do take the time to open this book or purchase this resource while their children are going through this class, I think it does really lay out very well some of the age appropriate questions that are going to come up after those students have a lesson in OWL class. Reiterating, like Kat said, copies of all the books. Because regardless of what age the parent orientation is for, having the resources that build for people, showing them how to build a library, giving them the opportunity, making sure they have the books on hand for their children before the classes start. It's just a really nice way to build their own personal library and have that information at their fingertips. And then this kind of like is the overall piece of that. If you have the staff, like Melanie was saying, I know not everyone does have somebody who is on staff that can direct the program while facilitators are teaching children. But if you have the staff, meeting with the adults while the students are in OWL classes, even if it's just conversation and not necessarily lessons, that time and space to listen. I've had just really productive space with families saying, oh my goodness, after that lesson, this came up and we didn't know how to talk about it. And then everyone in the room is saying, same thing happened with us. So that for being able to provide that space for the adults to be empowered at the same time is really important. If you don't have the staff, running conversations at another time, either using the parents and caregivers curriculum or a Zoom or something else in order to help empower adults and help them practice. I think that's one of the biggest things that I try to get across as a tip to my parents during orientation. Very similar to what Kat was saying, is that it's not going to be perfect. You're never gonna, most people say they had in my generation will say I had the one conversation with my parents, right? When you have one conversation, obviously it's never going to be perfect. And so this is the idea that OWL is lifelong, the idea that this curriculum runs from kindergarten all the way through older adult. It's just this idea, this line that we have to practice all the time, and the conversation changes as our children age. The conversation changes as we age, and all of the experiences that we have throughout our lifetime, we need to practice having those conversations. And so providing that space again to talk and listen for adults, so that they have the practice, so that they feel confident in having those conversations with their children, is really important. And then just the reiteration, I know because of the title, right, not leaving out that place of worship, not leaving out the fact that there is the sexuality and our faith piece, that this is rooted in the understanding that sexuality isn't just about sex, like we hear so much in the media, that it's about all the layers of being human, and who we are created to be. And it adds a relevance, I think, to our places of faith, to our places of worship, to our church communities, that this is a bigger reason for having this conversation, rather than health class in school or whatever, that having this run through a lens of our faith community is just really, really, really important. So don't forget to mention that. Don't leave that out, because it roots it in something so much bigger.
Jenn, another reason for doing that, this question was just asked of me this morning, in states where there are now limits on talking about termination of pregnancies, on talking about anything related to reproductive choice or transgender identity or LGBTQ rights, within our faith community, we have more freedom to talk about those things than people do out in the community. And what we have been advised of is that to date, at least, there are no people who have been criminally charged in those states with simply providing education. So it's okay to say, yes, here's how medical abortion works. Here's how surgical abortion works. Here's a hotline. What's not okay would be, here's money to go get an abortion, or here are the drugs you can use, or I'll give you a ride. So we can talk about it in our congregations, and just provide the facts, and we'll be fine. And I'm glad that you brought that conversation up so I could mention that to folks, because I know that's on a lot of people's minds. There was a question. Thank you, Jenn, for all that wonderful information. The two of you play off each other so well. There was a question, Kat, in the question box. I'm wondering if you could answer, that was about boundaries around your tips for parents.
Yes, there was asked for an example of boundaries related to trust tips. And there's actually a lot I could say about boundaries, so I'm going to limit it to two things. One is around time. So OWL can make people nervous, and there can be a lot of extra conversations needed around OWL. And one of the boundaries that you can set is that those conversations can happen with the staff person and not with the facilitator directly. And that's a way to support them, because a 20-minute conversation times 10 is actually a lot more work for a facilitator. And they're already some of our most dedicated volunteers. And so that's a boundary that when you bring in a staff person, you can say, I'm here for those conversations. And let's give the facilitators space to do what they're going to do. The other place that this comes in really big in orientations is around disclosures, either for the caregiver or for the child. And in OWL, we spend a lot of time working with the participants about how to talk about things without disclosing personal information. And the parents don't have that when they're coming to you. And we are on the same team, but there is confidentiality for the participants in OWL. And so boundaries need to be really firm around disclosures. One of the ways that you see this show up is kids will often try on pronouns in OWL because that is a place where it feels safe for them to do so. And if you're having conversations with parents, that is a tricky thing to switch because you're seeing different parts of their child. And so if you have the conversations with caregivers, with a staff person, and you have the conversations with participants with the facilitator, you're less likely to break confidentiality. And so that is another way of like holding a boundary and just like building it into your system. Many facilitators are skilled enough to have that conversation without breaking confidentiality, but it creates a structure that makes that easier for everyone.
I absolutely love that, Kat, and especially the idea that you mentioned earlier about, well, you didn't use the term burnout, but I will, especially when you're doing the longer program, when you're doing the 7 to 9 program, and you've got 26 workshops if you include the pornography workshop. That's a lot of time, and it's a lot of prep work. And so it's not that we want to necessarily say, hey, you can't talk to the facilitators, but any of those questions that could be asked of somebody else are better asked of somebody else, because so much of it, the load is being carried by the facilitators. I wanted to take the opportunity to let folks know that I know everybody's been waiting for 1012, and we had to get the young adult field test out of the way. I put a link for it in the chat, and people are getting their materials for the field test now. It's not too late to create a young adult program. It's for anybody ages 18 to 35. So if you have a young parent group, ask them if they're willing to try out. There's 14 workshops. We need testers to try at least 7 of them. I'm really pleased with this curriculum. It's very different from the first edition. And I've been mired in it for the last year, and I'm really excited to get it in people's hands now. So sign up for the field test if you can, because the field testing gives us really important feedback about whether we got the timing right on the activities, whether we have enough variety of activities, whether the activities are of interest. Are they way up here and they need to be more here, or vice versa? So please, if there's any way that you can engage folks in your congregation or church or community in the field test, we would welcome that. We're planning to end it at the end of February, but I might be convinced to extend the timeline if you need another month or two. So the application is there. It's also on the UCC website and on the UUA OWL pages. As far as 1012 goes, that should be available in January for the 2nd edition of 1012. It'll be a PDF at that point. So if you pre-order it, you'll get the PDF. It will not include Sexuality and Our Faith right off the bat. When you get the hard copy, it will. But the PDF will just be of Our Whole Lives. What else is going on? We have a new reprint of 4 through 6 that's available. So it includes recommended updates. The language is less binary than in the 2017 edition. So if you have a little extra money in your budget, if you can buy a new edition of that, that will be good. There will be a reprint, I think it might even be available now, of young adult of the 1st edition that includes some updates. So you can offer that while we're waiting to field test the 2nd edition. We're not updating OWL for older adults or OWL for adults at this point. And sometime early next year, we will be offering a reprint of 7 to 9 that has the recommended updates built into it. Again, it won't be a complete revision, but it will have those updates built into it. For anyone who doesn't have the latest updates, please check the date on yours for the 7 to 9 recommended updates. It should say 2023. If yours does not, please email owl@uua.org or owl@ucc.org. Ideally, give Amy her vacation time. She gets a week and a half of vacation, so you're welcome to just email owl@uua.org, and I'll make sure that you get it. Kat or Jen, is there anything else you would like to add? All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. We're here. If anybody has any other questions, we're happy to address them. I would like to thank the two of you for all the wonderful information that you get, and just kind of put a plug again. The reason why the UCC and the UUA are so insistent. I mean, you got congregational polity, so we can't mandate anything, but the reason that we strongly recommend custodial parents and guardians attending Our Whole Lives orientations is that it, in addition to everything that Jen and Kat mentioned, we are in a time of political strife and a lot of arguments about sexuality education. And what parent orientation does for you is to offer you a layer of protection, that everybody who's in the room, whether it's kindergarten up through the teenage edition, everybody who's in the room is in there because the adults who are in charge of them for protecting their interest have agreed to have them in this program. You have it on paper. So it's really important. It's also a contract between the congregation, the facilitators, and the parents and guardians. So that's why we're so careful about, don't go rogue, don't go creating your own workshops, don't go making adaptations that we haven't authorized, because you've signed a contract. Those parents are signing a contract that says, I know what my kids are getting and I agree to it and I support it. And when you add other material to it, you're going outside of that contract. So you kind of need an addendum. Let's say that you felt your congregation needed, your youth needed a program about not using recreational drugs because it affects sexual consent or whatever, or somebody once asked for a smoking cessation workshop. Like, go ahead, find one, do it, but it's not part of OWL. And anytime you do something like that, you need to amend the contract that you have with parents by letting them know what your plans are and giving them an opportunity to say, yes, my child will be there, or no, my child will not be there for that workshop. So think of it as the orientation as an opportunity to lay out the contract between the families and the facilitators and congregation, and go on your merry way once everybody says yes. So good luck to everybody. Have a wonderful Our Whole Lives year. Kat?
There's someone with a raised hand. And I
Okay.
just wanted to add that, like, what you're talking about is consent.
Mm.
And if we're going to have consent, like, let's also have it be enthusiastic. And the orientations are an opportunity for, like, joy and enthusiasm, and to, like, start on this exciting note.
Exactly. See you all next month. Take care.
There was a raised hand, and I don't know if it is there.
They left.
Okay.
I tried to follow up. Looks like maybe something came in the Q&A.
Oh, it was a reaction.
Okay.
Raised hands.
Nice. Oh, there you go. I like it.
We will be posting the link for next month's, and honest to goodness, my mind is a sieve right now. I think it has to do with LGBTQ topics. But honestly, not in my brain at the moment. Sorry.
Laura, you can stop the recording. We normally end when She
We
said,
do meet